The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 6, Mana. The totem pole of the North American natives, embodying as it does a set of ancient concepts, which now are vastly and sadly muddled, gives us one of the finest symbols for the three selves of man, and for the mana or life force they use. In the totem pole, there is a central column made up of one figure directly above another. Very often the two lower figures are standing on an animal and are partly joined as if sat on the shoulders of the other. Legs clasped with arms of the lower figure. This pair would be a fine symbol of the relation between the low and the middle selves, closely united, but one a little higher than the other in the climb away from the animal world, symbolized by the animal at the bottom. Still higher up, and seldomly so closely united, comes a figure which often has spreading wings and which is ideal as a representation of the guardian angel or high self, whose symbol is a bird. In Christianity, it was the dove, which came from heaven to alight the newly baptized Jesus. The central trunk, out of which the images are carved, can stand for the basic mana, as taken from the food that we eat, be it the vegetable or animal world, and the air that we breathe. This mana is taken from the food and air by the low self and is stored in its aka body, but it is shared with the middle self and the high self. It might be guessed that if there are more figures carved on the totem pole above that which we select to represent the high self, these may represent an ever-ascending scale of higher beings who must also be furnished with mana if they are to have enough of the gross and heavy force of the physical world to work in its materials and make needed changes. The mana, when used as the life force of the middle self, is changed in some subtle way. We do not know just how. The Kahunas of old symbolized this as a dividing of the basic mana into two kinds and called it the divided state, mana, indicating by doubling the word the fact that it has doubled in its power so that it could be used by the middle self to control and command the low self. This is the force we know vaguely in modern psychology as the will, W-I-L-L. It is also the force which should at all times be strong enough to make the low self obey every order, but which, as it is easy to see, is seldom used in its full strength, resulting in the low self getting out of hand frequently with most of us. It is so much easier to let George do it than decide for ourselves what is the best thing to be done, and then hold George with a firm grip of will and make him do it. Most of us have experienced the failure to keep up a diet or stop smoking or give up any bad habit. In some cases, George behaves like a frightened horse, which takes the bit in its teeth and runs away. Once he gets to running, there is little to be done, but let him go while the driver hangs on and hopes for the best. Once George, with his genius for forming habits, learns to do a certain thing in a certain way, he does his very powerful best to prevent the middle self from breaking him of the habit. It is not generally known that we can use certain exercises, in brackets about to be described, close bracket, to accumulate a surcharge, an extra large and powerful charge of vital force at any time we need it, provided we are in fair health and we are not starved. We can use these surcharges of mana in several ways, several very valuable ways, particularly in healing ourselves and others, and in making a prayer that will have real working power. The Kahunas believed that by an action of mind, a man adds to the amount of mana he has already created from food and air consumed by quickening the extraction process. This theory is supported by our physiologists who have found that when we digest our food, it is not all used at once, but is changed to glycogen or blood sugar and oxidized with oxygen from the air that we breathe to give us such amounts of force and strength as we may need for the work we happen to do. If this is true, and there seems to be no reason to question the findings, the low self, who attends to all such matters, can at any time begin to take in more air and cause more blood sugar to be burned to create more of that strange chemically manufactured force that we call mana. The low self learns to do this in most cases with very little trouble. Given a natural talent for this work and sufficient practice, he becomes an expert, and as some of the HRAs saw demonstrated in 1950, we can project the great surcharge at a relaxed individual and knock him unconscious to the floor. Not that any good HRA would be party to such activities. And then in brackets it says, the demonstration was made by a traveling mesmerist in Hollywood, California, and is not part of the HRA testing. Close bracket. The most interesting thing about mana is that it seems alive and it seems to have a form of intelligence of its own. This is not really so. It can act only when it changes and vitalizes aka substance, as in an aka finger when it is projected, and the consciousness is invariably that of the low self, who is dictating the projection and also the things it is to do. The exception is when a disembodied spirit seizes control and draws the surcharge of mana into its own low self body and uses it there. The accumulation of a surcharge of vital force is accomplished just as the swinging of the pendulum or the identification of objects hidden in cardboard boxes, simply by explaining to George just what he is to do and then ask him to try to do it, to help him after we have explained that we want to burn more food in the bloodstream and make a great deal more vital force to add to that already stored in his aka body. We can use the voluntary muscles and start breathing more deeply. This will furnish the air to be used as well as suggest what we want done. Another thing that we can do is to perform a few setting up exercises while we wait for George to begin working. This always starts the low self to manufacturing more mana. Otherwise, we would use up what we have in a few moments and begin to feel faint. Every athlete knows that he can only go so far and so fast on his first wind. That is the charge of mana he happens to have in his body and aka body at the start, but that in a short time he gets a fresh supply of strength, his second wind, and can then keep going steadily and at top speed. Or instead of exercising, we can assume the mental attitude of one set to run a race. We hold the picture in mind of getting ready to run. We breathe more rapidly and we tense up the muscles a little. George seldom fails to get the idea then, and we begin creating the desired mana. I told in The Secret Science Behind Miracles of the practical methods taught by Baron Eugene Fersen, Fersen, for creating a surcharge of life force in the body. He toured this country some years ago, giving lectures and presiding over classes. His term for mana was universal life force, and he had some idea that there were 3 grades of it. However, he did not know of the 3 selves of the Kahuna belief, nor of their 3 manas. The basic difference between the Fersen theory and the Kahuna theory, as we see it, hinges on the matter of where the surcharge of life force comes from. Baron Fersen believed, in part with the religionists of some schools in India, that there is a universal life force, which is everywhere, much like a giant ocean of force spread throughout the universe, which is drawn upon by all living things for a share of its life-giving power. The Kahunas left nothing behind them when they disappeared from the face of the earth at the end of the last century, which seems to indicate that they considered life force universal in character. But Fersen believed that by an action of mind he could draw it out of the air and absorb and store it in his body. Baron Fersen's affirmation was, "The universal life force is flowing through me now. I feel it." There was a pause between the two parts of the affirmation to let the flow accumulate. Oh, I see. Okay. So his affirmation was, "The universal life force is flowing through me now. I feel it." So there's a pause between the two parts of the affirmation to let the flow accumulate. While making this affirmation, he had his pupils stand with their feet as far apart as was comfortable to maintain, and extend hands and arms at the sides, level with the shoulders. His belief was that the four limbs extended out beyond the astral body, or etheric double, and touched the flow of the force in the air about the pupil, picking up the charge as radio antennae pick up the broadcast waves from a station. There soon came a tingling in the hands, which might or might not have been caused by the accumulation of the surcharge, but it was expected, and affirmations said it was there, and George obliged. Or the circulation in the arms may have been slowed down so that the tingling came for that reason. At any rate, the surcharge of mana resulted and could be demonstrated. The late Oscar Brunner, Brunler, the distinguished scientist and radiesthetist, was a very helpful HRA. He demonstrated a method that he had used, which was even better than the Fersen method, although based on the same disputed idea that the force was in the air. His method added enough physical exercise to the operation to cause an automatic start in the accumulation of more mana and deeper, faster breathing. He stood with feet fairly close together and raked the air with widespread fingers, reaching up as high as he could, standing on tiptoes, raking forward with circling movement, which swept past the sides of his ankles, the body being bent, to reach the ankles, and ended with the hands and fingers brought on around and up behind as high as possible. This raking circle was in this way about 3/4 of a full circle. At the end of each raking movement, he relaxed his arms and hands a moment and brought them back while he straightened his body, lifted his arms, and repeated the raking stroke. This was done vigorously several times, while the mental picture was strongly held that the life force was being gathered and a large amount of it stored in the body. Dr. Brunner's method, coupled with the affirmation, "I am now acquiring a large surcharge of mana," repeated with each swing, is excellent. But once George learns the art, he will respond without anything more than the mental request from the middle self. Some people carry a normal charge of mana, which is high, and some people carry a very low one, but all can accumulate a surcharge, which may be tested. The test that Baron Fersen used and taught was simple. A well-charged person can, if he imagines and pictures that he is doing so, cause the mana in his body to concentrate in his hands and there become magnetic in its action. His hands, made to become human magnets in this simple way, can then be placed lightly on the shoulders of a friend who is not surcharged, the friend standing facing away, and when the hands are withdrawn slowly, they will pull like magnets, often pulling the friend after them with enough force to throw him off balance. Certain persons are far more easily pulled in this way than are others. By putting on a surcharge each time in advance, and then testing a different friend, a sensitive one will be found who will respond to the pull more readily than the others. I have told elsewhere of an experiment which I carried on after studying with Baron Fersen in Honolulu and practicing a bit of accumulating surcharge. I had successfully exerted a strong pull on several friends in the class, but I was not sure that suggestion or even imagination might not account for the pull. To make sure, I arranged with an acquaintance in the class to make a test on his dog. We took turns accumulating a surcharge, standing behind the dog, placing hands on his rump, and drawing them slowly away. The dog was pulled after our hands, no matter how he clawed at the matting to resist. The strange part was we felt no pull at all on our hands. In fact, it is hard to explain, even in terms of Huna. However, it is possible that the akamana in our hands protruded as we pulled our hands away, retaining a grip on the dog in some way, and under the command of the low self, used up the force in the invisible aka projections to pull the dog backwards. Spirits with nothing but their aka bodies and mana have taken from the living to fill them, can use up all the mana in a single sudden effort, with the result that the living can be lifted into the air, tables or even heavy pianos lifted, and even entire houses shaken as if by an earthquake. The Kahunas, it will be remembered, used the symbol of water for mana. When they wished to accumulate a surcharge, they breathed deeply and visualized mana, rising like water rises in a fountain, higher and higher until it overflows. The body is pictured as the fountain and the water is the mana. They also could then send akamana into throwing sticks, which, when thrown over the heads of a line of fighting warriors to strike an enemy, would render the warrior so struck temporarily unconscious, much as the mesmerist in Hollywood, by projecting a surcharge along the line of his vision, undoubtedly with a projected finger of akamana, could send a man sprawling to lie unconscious on the floor. The magnetic pull test is one that demands other persons to try it on, and for this reason the HRAs needed a simple test that could be done when alone. One was not devised at once, but in time one was worked out that was satisfactory for most of those who had taught their George to handle a pendulum with fair skill. In this test, the pendulum is taken in hand in the usual way, but held over the left palm. George would be told simply and carefully that what is wanted is a report in code through the pendulum of the amount of mana he is now in possession of, that is, in the physical and aka bodies interblended. This will give the normal count without surcharge. In this code, as in all others, the convention must be established and well understood. The convention should be made to limit the count, as it takes a tirelessly long time to swing out 1,000 counts. suggest hundreds for this reason, because we are aiming only at a comparison with the count after a surcharge has been made, and swinging circles, which may be counted instead of the former straight lines, will be an interesting change. The procedure may be further shortened by using a convention in which you say, "Is the count over 300 swings?" If one gets a yes at 300, but a no at 400, very well, let's start counting at 300. When the right number is reached, George is to stop the swing with a slight jerk or wiggle of the pendulum. If you doubt the count arrived at, check with George on his finding with a yes or no method. When the normal charge is agreed upon, a surcharge should be accumulated and another test made for an increase in count. It is well to keep a record of the results of the practice each day, for with only a few minutes of daily practice it can be seen that the surcharge becomes larger and larger. Anything over double normal is good going. 4 times normal is enough to send you and your George to the head of the class. A number of the HRAs reported back to me that their pendulums swung, often in very wide circles, but that George just kept on swinging it endlessly until their arms got too tired to hold the pendulum any longer over their palms. I had the opportunity on 2 occasions to run check tests with my own pendulum and my George over the hands of HRAs who could get nothing but endless counts of swings. My George proved to be satisfactory at measuring for others, as he had been for me, giving me the normal count in each instance, and then the increased count after a surcharge was taken on. In both cases, a little conversation and perhaps a little silent converse between our 2 Georges resulted in the exercise being understood and the erratic swings changed to give accurate counts. From this experience, we concluded that the convention had not been understood by the Georges. They had caught the idea that the pendulum was to be a circle swung to indicate a charge of life force, which is a very simple idea to grasp, but had failed to communicate their part in using a certain number of swings as an indicator of the normal charge and of making increased numbers of swings to show the surcharge. The individual with a low normal charge level of mana has almost always found that he can sense the addition of mana after taking on a surcharge. It adds to the sense of well-being, of physical strength or will and determination, and it sharpens the mind, makes memorization faster and easier, and the sense is more accurate. The latter feature is best noted in vision. The HRA test most favored is that of hanging up a colored picture, looking at it before taking on of a surcharge, and then again after the surcharge has been accumulated. Vision becomes clearer, and more, it is surprising how much wider a field one becomes aware of at one time, and how much more detail stands out, and how the color strengthens. One HRA who worked long and wearisome hours on this job found that if once or twice, morning and afternoon, he paused to take on a surcharge of mana, he was immediately strengthened and greatly refreshed. All the evidence shows that the mana is, indeed, the life force, and that with it, the life is strong, while without it, it fades. This is not exclusively an HRH or Huna discovery. Medical men have known that if the level of vital life force falls too low, the middle self loses its power to control the low self, and the low self, lacking guidance, becomes erratic. Then neurotic or psychotic symptoms appear, and if the level is far enough down, the victim sinks into a state of morbidity and depression that may end in complete insanity. One cannot increase his aka body substance or lose it. but he can increase the mana charge with very beneficial results when it is too low or more mana is needed for one purpose or another. Conversely, one can lose his mana and be progressively hurt by the loss, ending, if the loss is complete, in death. However, the point that is most often. No. Let me start the sentence again. However, the point that is most important when considering mana is that when one has learned to accumulate a surcharge, it is possible to use it with the help of the high self to perform miracles, which range all the way down from slow and simple healing to miraculous changes in bodily tissues and even the fabric of the future. For this reason, rather than to pause here to discuss the use of mana surcharge in the hands of the low and middle selves, we shall go on at once to consider the nature of the high self, in order that we may sooner take up the work with mana and thought form clusters in which all three of the selves work together as a perfectly balanced and coordinated team. And that concludes Chapter 6. Chapter 7 is called The High Self. And I hope you'll come back for that. Hope you're enjoying this. Please like and subscribe. Till soon.